Welcome to the SDA webinar, Proofreading, Making Your Work Shine. My name is Charlotte Markovich, and I will be your host today. And I'd like to welcome Ann Lubkowski. She is a certified administrative professional in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. She is the executive assistant to the president and CEO of the Hamilton Community Foundation, where she has worked for more than 22 years. She is also the current president of her local chapter of the International Association of Administrative Professionals. In her executive assistant role, Ann has developed extensive expertise in all aspects of document creation. She is recognized by peer colleagues for her proofreading and editing knowledge and is responsible for proofreading her organization's annual report and newsletter publications before they go to print. In today's presentation, Ann will share with you some valuable strategies and techniques that will help you make your work shine. And just so everyone's aware, if you do have any questions during the presentation, please use that Q&A box that's at the top left of your screen to type a message to me, and I will go ahead and read those out loud. And like I said, at the very end of the presentation, should you have any more questions, you can press #6 to unmute your line, or you can go ahead and send me something via that Q&A box. And again, welcome, and Ann, I'd like to pass it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Charlotte, and welcome to all of our webinar participants. I'm really pleased to be with you today, and I applaud you for carving out some time out of your busy day so that you can focus on strategies and techniques that will make your work sparkle. So let me start by asking you this. As you were waiting for this webinar to start, how many of you wondered about the spelling error that's contained in the first word of this slide title? Did you notice it? I can bet that if you happened to notice it, you were already starting to doubt my credibility, and that was before you even heard a thing that I had to say. I'm guessing that a niggle of doubt was already starting to form in your mind. Would I be right? As you probably guessed, that spelling error was intentional, and it was simply a way for me to make a point. I really can't stress enough that first impressions, whether they're good or bad, can be lasting impressions. We all have different roles in our organizations, and there is one thing that we do all have in common, regardless of our role in our title, and that's our desire to make a difference and to do a great job every single day. I know that you strive for excellence in all that you do as well. I'm passionate about the tips and tricks that I will share with you today, as I just know that these strategies will help you to cultivate your own personal brand of excellence. I'd like to share with you a quote that I saw on a website from Chicago, and I think it's absolutely true. Few things diminish the credibility of a written piece or its author more than typos, misspellings, or grammatical errors. I've had lots of practice proofreading a variety of materials, annual reports, newsletters, minutes, letters, tables, the usual assortment of printed materials that you would find in an office environment. And I know that the thought of needing to or having to proofread can frequently be one that people dread. It may feel like one of those boring mandatory chores that we do because we know it's expected of us, and it's not something that we would choose to do by choice. However, when you come to understand the power that an expertly proofread document can have, proofreading will be something that you will want to do and something that you will look forward to doing as the final touch on each and every document that you create. This is a wonderful slogan from Alouette Cosmetics, because your appearance says so much about you. It's an actual slogan that they've used for years, and think about whether you would want to be inclined to buy skincare products or cosmetics from someone whose own skin is poorly cared for, or whose own makeup application is not well done. That salesperson could be the reigning national expert on all of that stuff, but your first impression of her would likely make you doubtful. First impressions are so important, but it's really not just about first impressions. It's about an opportunity to make a lasting impression. In many cases, it's the only opportunity to make a good impression. For example, you might have a proposal to a new client, or a letter to a potential donor or a key donor. So let's talk about some of the things that we'll cover in today's session. What do we mean when we say proofreading? Sounds like a no-brainer, really. But there's a whole skill set involved, and it's up to all of us to sharpen those skills and to keep them sharp. Why should we make it a priority? Who's it important to? Do we do it just to please the boss? I will talk to you a little bit about 3 key overarching strategies and several tried and true techniques for spotting errors. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the learning references that you might find helpful in other places. So, to be specific, proofreading, what is it? Proofreading involves a very close inspection of written materials in order to find and correct mistakes and to provide a clean, concise, accurate impression or documents to impress your readers. Editing, on the other hand, is an added layer of fixing for tone and style and consistency. We're not born with those skills in place, and so like anything else, we need to get in the habit of practicing. This next slide is an interesting summary description that I found on the Don Halstead Design website. It is a really interesting look at the various levels of proofreading expertise. And until I had seen it broken down like this, I hadn't really thought of it in these terms. You can see that a beginner-level proofreader catches deviations from original copy, misspellings, math that's not quite correct, fairly straightforward minor things. You move on to intermediate 1 level. All of that stuff, plus they have a good eye for grammatical and punctuation errors. Moving on to an even added level, an intermediate 2, they do all of those first 2 things. Plus they're really good at identifying various typefaces and font specifications. And if you have an advanced knowledge of language and that kind of thing, you can add an even greater layer of proofreading expertise to the kind of things you do. And if you develop skills in the editing with the actual words and not just the typography, you can make yourself really valuable. Suffice it to say that proofreading is multidimensional, and as your own proofreading skills are enhanced, you will find yourself moving through these various levels of competence quite easily. So let's pause to think about whose responsibility it is to ensure that the documents that ultimately go out the door are accurate. Some might say that it's the typist's responsibility. True. Others might say that it's whoever ultimately signs the letter or the agreement who should make the final check for accuracy. An argument can be made for that as well. However, I would hesitate to say that busy executives don't have time to be sitting there looking for typing mistakes and repetitive words and things like that. So my personal opinion is that while the document signer who's likely in the management stream has the ultimate authority, I believe that it's really critically important that those of us who prepare the documents for signature make it our responsibility to make sure that the final product is as accurate as possible. Content is very important, but like it or not, the way a paper looks affects the way that others judge it. When you've worked hard to develop your ideas and present them to others on paper, you don't want careless errors distracting your readers from what you have to say. So presentation is everything. Effective proofreading takes extra time, but it pays off in the end with a document that you can be proud of. So it is important to a number of stakeholders. It's important to the reader. The reader needs to be able to focus on and really absorb the key messages without all kinds of distractions with errors and strange-looking beings in your documents. It's really important to your organization. It helps to promote your organization's credibility in the community, its professional image, and its reputation as a corporate entity. And it's really important to you, for you to have a continuing sense of pride in your work and to help develop your own professional reputation. And it's important just as much to the other members of your team. If you can always rely that the work of the other people on your team is correct and has been proofread and it's something you can be proud of, you can help to continue to build your reputation as a really cohesive team. So whose reputation is at stake? As I talked about, there's many stakeholders. You and your professional reputation, the author of the document and his or her professional reputation, your employer organization and its reputation, certainly all the current and future customers, clients, the people that surround the circle of your organization, the staff, the board, volunteers, clients, customers, anybody who's connected with you. Your work is a reflection of not just you individually, but of everyone at your organization. And the quality of your work reflects your individual professional reputations. Errors. We all make them. Some are big errors, and some would be considered minor errors. But in most cases, those errors are very costly, and they're very distracting in terms of staff time and effort, resources, the human resources involved, and the physical resources, such as wasted paper and printer ink, and especially in terms of stakeholder confidence. There's a real psychology of what seeing errors says to readers. For example, in the charitable foundation world that I work in, and a shout out to the Calgary Foundation, I see you're on the line, people who see errors may wonder, can I really rely on the other information that they give me? For example, if I get fund statements and I get financial documents, can I expect to see errors in that kind of stuff as well? They might wonder, if they don't take the time to correct these kind of errors, will my fund agreement or my grant materials or my contracts, will they also contain errors? How well will they manage my charitable contribution if they can't seem to produce a letter with my name spelled correctly? So it's a really important thing to think about. When we decide that we don't have time to proofread, or we make the mistake of assuming that our work is correct and we don't bother to proofread, we are taking a risk every single time. And I'd like to just share a couple comical stories with you. They're funny to me. I'm sure they weren't funny to those involved, of some errors made by people along the way who took that gamble and they lost. We have a wonderful scholarship fund here at the Hamilton Community Foundation, and it's called the Geritol Foley Scholarship Fund. And we got a lovely letter quite a few years ago from a student who had received a Performing Arts Scholarship. The letter was beautiful. The words were touching. Unfortunately, the letter was addressed to the Genital Follies instead of the Geritol Follies. So as heartfelt as the message was, that little error at the very beginning took a bit of the edge off of that heartfelt sentiment. I've seen references to certified pubic accountant. That was very clever. And I understand that at one point the United States government printed a whole whack of pens with words embossed on it and said the Untied States Congress instead of the United States Congress. And the University of Wisconsin apparently issued diplomas one time with the word Wisconsin spelled incorrectly. I've even seen people spell their own name incorrectly. I'm sure that we can all think of examples of our own errors that we wished we would have caught in the past. We came across other people's errors all the time in newspapers and printed materials, and really errors are all around us. In fact, just yesterday I saw a great big billboard sign on the lawn outside a building that's up for sale, and in giant letters, and I do mean giant, it was probably 3 feet, each letter was 3 feet high. The sign said, "Enquires." Not inquiries, but enquires. And another sign that I came across in our local mall, one of our tailoring shops was advertising, again in great big letters, alternations instead of alterations. And so it's comical to see some of this stuff. I'm sure it's not good for business, and so it's wise not to roll those dice. So let's talk specifics now. Setting the stage is really important to a consistently successful proofreading approach. In order to set the stage for proofreading tasks, I'd like to talk to you about some of the routines that I have found to be extremely helpful. Time. Take your time. Make sure that you're not in a rush, or you're bound to miss errors. Be sure to allow sufficient time to review your work. My youngest son is frequently telling me, quite proudly in fact, that he was the first one finished his math or the first one to hand in his book report. And my usual response to him is along the lines of, you get no bonus points for being faster first if the work is full of errors when you hand it in. So the same principle applies here. Now I'm going to pause just briefly so that I can just get a sip of water. The next important component is to cultivate some quiet around you. In order to focus and concentrate on what you're reading, make sure that your environment is conducive to focusing and concentrating. Close your door. Go to a quiet workspace. Move any unrelated work and dirty dishes off your desk. Put your phone on Do Not Disturb. Clear your workspace. I find that when all other materials are out of the way, I mentally feel more able to focus, and there is way less visual distraction. Move away from your computer. I typically move away from the computer to proofread, and I find a clear space to read, even if it's simply just moving to the other side of a table or even in the same room. It just mentally and physically moves you to a different space so that you're in a new zone, new mindset for the proofreading component. Proofreading from a printed copy is important. While it's always good to do your first check of proofreading on the screen, it's really critically important to print out a hard copy and proofread line by line from that piece. In fact, I frequently enlarge my printed copies to make it even easier to read. I think that's a really important step. Now, music. I find that having some quiet, relaxing background music, just instrumental stuff, is helpful to getting me in the right frame of mind to concentrate. I find for me, music and, radio with vocals and words, that doesn't work for me. You may find that that kind of music works for you, or you may find that no music, no sound at all is best. But, I think being mindful of the noise is important. Taking a short break can sometimes be very helpful. If you leave some time between the time that you finish creating the document and the time that you sit down to proofread it, that can be a very effective strategy. For really big, important projects, such as proofreading board of director minutes or annual reports, things of that nature, sometimes waiting until the next day to proofread that piece is an even better practice. By doing that, you will be more likely to read what's actually on the page instead of reading what your brain remembers that you just typed. And speaking of clearing your workspace, if your workspace looks like this, how can we possibly make physical and mental room for our proofreading tasks? There are 3 overarching proofreading strategies that I'm going to share with you that I have found very successful, and then I'll give you some concrete examples of the techniques that can support those strategies. So here we go. Number 1, it's really important to cultivate a healthy sense of doubt. Don't make the mistake of assuming that your work is correct. Assume instead that there's likely some little error in there and go about finding it. If you don't find one, that's a bonus, but the mistake would be in assuming that it's perfect coming out of the gate. I also can't stress strongly enough how important it is to put just as much emphasis on the proofreading phase of the document as the time that you spent creating it in the first place. Every time you create a document, it really is a 2-phase process. Create, proofread, create, proofread. And note that I didn't say create and if you have time or the inclination, proofread. If you can consistently approach your work with that same weight philosophy, you will be doing yourself a real favor. So number 2, and I say to you, always, always read from a printed copy. While it may not be considered the most environmental approach, it's the most effective way to see what's really on the page. And don't be afraid to enlarge the hard copy. As I said, it makes it so much easier to read. Certainly a quick scan on the screen is a great start, but you really need to move to a printed copy, at least for documents of any substance. You may be just fine proofreading on screen for, an inter-office petty cash form, but for important materials going out externally, you'd be wise to invest the time and the energy in reading a printed copy. And there is a strategy for doing that as well. Of course there is. Kids are pretty smart. They've known for a long time that it's helpful to use your finger to follow along as you check your work. And when I say read from a printed copy, I'm not talking about finding a comfy chair and holding the paper up in front of your face and reading it like you would read a novel or a newspaper. I'm talking about clear your workspace, get the paper in front of you flat on the desk, and get your finger moving along the page. And instead of, or in addition to using your finger, meet your new best friend, the ruler. This guy will be one of your favorite tools for every one of your proofreading jobs. In my office, each of us has a great big long ruler. I like mine in particular because it has a dark blue edge, and I find that it makes it very helpful to easily see where I'm reading as I move the ruler from one line to the next. In fact, I frequently use 2 rulers when I'm reading, one on the original that I'm reading from and the other on the copy that I'm trying to double check. So if you're not in the habit of using a ruler to proofread, this is a habit that I strongly recommend that you develop. And last but not least, number 3, be methodical. Let's get methodical in our approach. And I would like to tell you about some of the techniques that I have found helpful. We have talked about enlarging on a printed copy, but you can also enlarge quite easily and fast on screen to help review. So, there's no sense trying to squint to see something or to get a magnifying glass or whatever your approach would normally be. Enlarge it in print, enlarge it on the screen. Excuse me. And when I talked about reading from a printed copy, again, I can't stress enough about how important it is to read it flat on your desk. Really be methodical about that. Use a ruler. Or if you don't have a ruler, take a blank piece of paper or a colored piece of paper and, follow the words and the lines along that way. Read slowly. That is a very helpful strategy so that you're actually reading each word one at a time instead of what your brain expects to see there. Sometimes people find that reading in reverse order is helpful. That is quite mind-boggling when you first start that practice because everything's disjointed because all the words, of course, don't make sense in reverse order. So it's an interesting way to see only the words that are there and not what your mind's expecting to see there. And don't be afraid to read your document more than once. There's many components that you're checking for, so you can be really methodical for reading for one error at a time, or pardon me, one kind of error at a time. If you try to identify and revise too many different things at once, you risk losing your focus and your proofreading will be less effective. I'll give you an example. In a set of minutes, check first that all of the item numbers are in the correct order and that the style is consistent. Then check the headers. Are they all correct? Is the date consistent? Then read and check for typos. So it's not that you would take the document and read it through once and have all of those things in mind at the same time. It's, at least for me, it's too overwhelming to check for too many things all in one sweep. So, okay, I'm going to right now check for this element. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, and now I can go on for the next element. So I find that helpful as well. I've even gotten in the habit of focusing on my best time of day. You know your best time of day, when your mind is freshest and clearest, and even within your own offices, what kinds of things typically happen at different times in the day. So if you know that you've got a giant proofreading job to do and it's going to take you 2 hours, and that you typically find yourself a little sleepy after lunch, don't set that project aside for after lunch. Do it in the morning. Wait till the next morning. Carve out some time when you're fresh. And here's a tip that not everybody does. There may be times when the document you're proofreading is quite complex. Maybe it's full of statistical or numerical data, or maybe it's full of unusual words or lots of names. Many moons ago when I worked as a legal secretary, I frequently used the buddy system to proofread legal descriptions for property land deeds and things of that nature. You'll instinctively know yourself when you need that second set of eyes and ears in the proofreading phase, so don't be afraid to ask a colleague to read across the desk from you for 10 or 15 minutes. You can either have your colleague read to you from the original and you can check the revised copy to make sure that you haven't missed anything, or you may find that it works better the other way around. Regardless of how you do it, buddy reading is always a helpful option. So let's talk about some of the ways to refine those proofreading techniques and to sharpen your skills. If there are types of errors that you know you tend to frequently make, then double check for those ones specifically. For example, if you're in the habit of dropping the R off of the word your, then be on extra alert for those ones. Read slowly. If possible, read out loud. Read one word at a time, whatever works for you. In fact, I frequently tend to read one character at a time. So instead of reading, what are we doing, I would mentally in my mind say, W-H-A-T-A-R-E, we, and I go through characters as I read each word. For those that aren't in the habit of doing that, that might sound like it would take you forever and a day to get through a document, but it actually goes quite quickly. And read what is actually on the page. Train yourself to read what's there and not what your mind is going to tell you that it should be there. And this can be a little tricky, especially if you happen to be the person who wrote what you're reading. Proofread more than once. Using spell check is important, but it's not enough to use spell check and then to do nothing else. Just think back to the genital follies and the certified pubic accountant references. Both words would not have jumped out in spell check as they were real words. And speaking of spell check, oh, we do love our spell check, don't we? Unfortunately, far too many people stop at spell check. They do a quick spell check, and I'm done. And that's the end of their spell check for proofreading. I'm sure I don't have to caution you not to do that. Spell check is a wonderful tool, and it's a great first step in our proofreading process, but it absolutely cannot be the only tool that you pull out of your toolbox. So let's look at some of the common pitfalls that we run into when we're checking our work. Having the day and the date out of sync. This one error can be a critical one and can cause a lot of unnecessary confusion, and extra work in order to set the record straight. If a letter has gone out to a dozen people telling them about a confirmed meeting date, and now we're looking at least another dozen revised letters or follow-up telephone calls or emails to correct the miscommunication about a date. And in fact, this just happened in my own community recently with a large community event. I could see that they talked about Thursday, March, whatever. And when I double-checked the calendar, I could see that the date they were talking about was actually a Tuesday. So they sent that out to, 200 or 300 people. and it's caused them, I'm sure, a lot of staff time and energy on the other end trying to correct that error. Excuse me for a moment while I take another sip of water. Mismatched numbering can be a problem as well. For example, when I'm doing my board minutes, I always ensure that the item numbers are consistent all the way down. So in other words, you wouldn't have item numbers that go 1.1, 1.2, and suddenly jump to 1.03. So, be alert for those kind of errors. And that's helpful when you check for components at a time. You can catch those quite easily. Okay, right now I'm going to double check for all the item numbers. Okay, in item 1, 1.1, 1.2, 1.0, okay, I've caught that. So if you're aware of that element, it's quite easy to go through and pick those things up. And I pick them up in my work all the time. Numerical calculations are really easy to double check. So just make sure you do that. Do the math. Inconsistent headers, especially if you copy a computer file and you forget to change the header to reflect the current document. You could have 4, 5, or 6 or endless pages all referring to a different date and a different meeting, and it creates some confusion down the road. Not reconciling the revised copy with the original. Sometimes words or even whole sections can be left out unintentionally when you don't take the time to compare the new version with the original version that you prepared your work from. And, of course, putting in the wrong zip code can be a problem as well. And you get letters that go off into postal limbo where, people don't get what they're supposed to be receiving. The missing pair components. These I see frequently. Excuse me. If you're putting quotations on something, make sure you've got the closing quote. If you're putting brackets, make sure, the opening and closing brackets are there. Phrases repeated in the same sentence or paragraph are also something you can be aware of. So, for example, I know my CEO, he and I together are always on the lookout when he's writing reports and letters and things like that. If he's already said a specific word in a sentence, we want to make sure that we don't unintentionally use the same repeat word several times in the same paragraph. So that's kind of a helpful process to get into. Let's take a few moments to look at some places that you will most likely to find errors hiding. The beginning and ends of sentences. They are easy to miss because people frequently, when they're proofreading, zip through and they'll gloss over the beginning and pay attention to the middle and then kind of taper off at the end. So be aware that that can be a challenge. Proper nouns. If you have people's names or cities, especially those with unusual spellings, you want to make sure that you are being on the lookout for those elements as well. Long words. If you've got words that are unusual or, or especially depending on what font you're using, you might have a lot of words with I and L side by side or two L's. It's easy to not be paying attention and to make sure that all of those these characters are actually in the words that you're looking at. If you don't pay attention, or sometimes if you don't enlarge it to read. The bottom third of the page, believe it or not, that can be a place where errors frequently are left unchecked because people start off reading the document with great intentions, beginning, the end, or beginning in the middle, and as they taper towards the end, they sometimes get a little lackadaisical as they go down the list. Number combinations. Double check the telephone numbers. Does your telephone number have 7 digits in it? I've received things where there's only 6 digits. Well, pick which one's missing. Find that. There might be some references to money with only the 1 0 at the end instead of 2. There are statistics where they could be talking about forget the percentage sign and things like that. So always be aware of all those little spots. Small double words. It's really easy to miss a missing word when you are reading what you think should be there rather than reading each one that's on the page. So those are some really common spots. Titles, headers, and footers. Frequently people forget that those areas need to be checked as well. They'll read the text, they'll read all the good stuff, and they forget to double check all the repeating features, the headers and the footers and the titles, things like that.
Anne?
Yes.
I do have a question that came in for you.
Absolutely.
What recommendations do you have for casual communications such as emails?
Actually, I'm going to be talking about that a few slides from now. So when we get to that, I'll be more than happy to share a bit of technique on that as well.
Okay, great. Thanks.
That's okay. Thank you. Double letter words. Here's another area where, if you've got words with double consonants or even double vowels, just be on the lookout. Make sure that you double check and make sure that those are all there. And this is that similar letters thing that I was talking about, especially if you're using a font where the letters look all quite similar as you go along. Those are easy spots to miss. Word substitutions. All these little tiny words, they look pretty innocuous, but if you're not careful and just not being intentional about making sure that what's there is correct, it's easy to get the wrong words in there. I've done it. We've all done it. Transposing words, especially if for those of us who do a lot of typing for a living and we're just moving along in our documents and we're typing away, it's really easy to get the words mixed up and out of order. So be aware of that. Be aware of letters within the words. The example here, from and form. Those are common spots. This next one is a big one, you and your. I see this all the time. In fact, I have to admit that this is one of my own personal words that I frequently forget to put the R on. So this is one of my own things, and I'm always trying to be extra careful that I catch myself on that. And missing punctuation. Is there a period at the end of the sentence? Is there capitals at the beginning? It's just all these basic things that we learned when we were in grade school and high school, and now we have to transfer it to the printed document. And again, make sure that the sequencing of page numbers and item numbers is logical. And I have to say that my own personal pet peeve is when I see dates that are split over two lines. So, for example, at the end of one line you might see January, and then on the next line you see 25, 2010. Please use the hard space feature. I can't imagine that any software program you're using does not have some capacity to trigger in a hard space. So you would type January, trigger in your hard space in the space in between January and the date, and that will stay together even if it jumps to the next line. That is same is true with phone numbers. You can do a hard hyphen. You can keep phone numbers and different things together. So just be on the lookout for those things. Those are really important. Just for fun, let's take a quick peek at this sentence. Okay, so just have a look at that, and then have a look at this one. How many of you caught the errors in these two sentences in your very first quick read-through? It's these kind of short sentences that people frequently don't bother to proofread, and yet these are prime breeding grounds for typographical errors. So I highly recommend that you get in the habit of reading everything, no matter how short the sentence is, and in fact, especially when the sentences are short. This little exercise, I'll just give you a few seconds to run your eye quickly over this short bulleted list. See what you see. So did you see any errors that need to be fixed? Let's look at one. Here's one. This word should be for, of course, F-O-R. Let's look at the next one. The word hills should have two L's in it, of course. And we could likely put a capital R on the word reading in that same line, if you were so inclined. Did you also happen to notice the error hiding in the heading? See, that's the I that's missing from accomplishments. In fact, because your eye was probably immediately drawn to the error in the word for in the first bulleted point, you might have just unintentionally skipped proofreading the slide title. That's what I was mentioning about how errors frequently are found in short headings, and yet they are so easily missed when people don't routinely use a methodical approach to their proofreading. So read everything. And our beloved email. Yes?
I just had a quick question. What is a hard space?
A hard space is, now I use Microsoft Word, and in Microsoft Word you can type the word, and then I do it without thinking about it, but I think it's something like control space or something like that. I'll make a note to myself to send that feature, how to do that feature. I'll send that to Charlotte, and she can circulate that if you like. But once you learn it, it's a wonderful thing. It only takes 2 extra keystrokes so that you keep any text, any word together with the next word so that it won't split over 2 lines. I frequently do hard space and hard hyphen. A hard hyphen I use sometimes if I have a hyphenated last name, and I really would like to keep the hyphenated last name together on one line, or same thing with hard spaces. So, you know, the spacing between dates, and let's see, off the top of my head, I can't think of other things I would do hard spaces for, but that's a really powerful feature, and one that I don't think a lot of people have ever really gotten used to using, but it's just a wonderful thing. And when I see letters come in, welcome, and we invite you to come to our event on January, and then you have to look at the next line to see what the actual day, the date is. And then so hard spaces, hard hyphens, those are really powerful features. Does that answer your question? So let's talk about our beloved email. Email can be a real challenge. So many mistakes squeak by in all of those quick little emails that we all send out every day. We see them all the time. I'm guilty, just like anyone else, of making those errors in my email. We owe it to ourselves to slow down a little bit, take an extra moment to proofread our email messages too. I can't count the number of times that I've seen the R dropped off the word your in emails, or I come across sentences with words missing. We've all done it. I've done it. You've likely done it. There is a spell check feature as well on email, so you can trigger that so that as a standing function, that every time you hit send, it will automatically do your spell check, go through your spell check, and trigger you for questions on spell check before it will allow your email to be sent. So that's a powerful feature. Quite a lot of us turn that feature off because it does slow down your email sending somewhat, although I guess that's the whole point, is to stop, have a chance to see if there's anything that's not quite correct in your emails. So spell check on emails. Give your emails the same credence with your proofreading routine as you would any other document you create. And because we need to be as intentional about proofreading our outgoing email as we are about our printed work, because that's all that communication, whether it's email, voicemail, printed copy, that all helps to establish our credibility and our professionalism. So it's really important to be mindful in your emails. It's all part of building our personal and our professional brand of excellence. And always remember that when your documentation contains calculations, do yourself a favor and do the math. And then do yourself a favor and do it again. And that's not to say that if you have, say, a 10-page financial statement that's already been prepared and approved by the auditors, that you need to double-check each and every figure. That's obviously likely not the best use of your time, as the auditors, would have already had a review process in place. I'm talking about regular documentation that talks about this figure and that figure and this calculation and that. The numbers probably will add up correctly, but think about how pleased you and your supervisor would be if you caught the ones that don't add up. And there's another prime consideration to think about. Not all of us are fortunate enough to have our own office with a door that we can close when we need some extra quiet to do our work, especially when you want to do complete a proofreading task. So here's a couple of ways that you can get around that problem. I have used these techniques frequently and sometimes all at the same time, and they really do work. So first tip, trigger your Do Not Disturb function on your telephone so that you won't be interrupted with phone calls when you're proofreading. If you're only proofreading for 5 minutes, it's not a big deal. Trigger, busy it out. It provides that quiet, uninterrupted time, and put it back on when you're done your document. For the next one, you'll have to probably chat with your supervisors and explain your rationale and ask them to endorse this kind of approach to your work. So here's what you do. Get a tent card or some other kind of paper sign and just post a sign on the outside of your cubicle or on your workstation somewhere plainly in sight that lets your coworkers know that your imaginary door will be closed for X amount of minutes while you complete some proofreading. The sign can say something like, my door is closed until 2 p.m., or it could say, proofreading in progress, please do not disturb. Now, I hear you. I can just imagine that you're probably thinking that an approach like that would never work in your working environment and within your own office culture. You would be very, very surprised. The very first time that I posted a sign like that on the outside of my cubicle railing, it worked like a charm. My coworkers immediately respected the request. Which isn't to say they weren't a little surprised by it, but they certainly respected the request to not be interrupted. And in fact, what happened as a side bonus is that even when I didn't have my little sign out, my coworkers tended to ask me if it was a good time to interrupt me. It's all about respecting the people that you work with, you know, respecting their space, their time, and their work processes, because you're really all in this for the same goal. The third alternative is that you can simply move to an empty office that has a door that you can close, and away you go. So there are a ton of additional learning resources that if you wanted to go to your local library or on the Internet, they are home to an endless source of materials on the topic of proofreading. You could find proofreading quizzes and websites devoted to teaching the finer points of proofreading and editing. You can find sites that will talk about things like 100 most commonly misspelled words. There's e-zine articles about proofreading, and Wikipedia weighs in on the subject as well. The more you learn about the finer points of proofreading, the more interesting and powerful the process will become to you. So I encourage you to have fun in your learning journey. As we approach the last couple slides here, I'd like to stress that, like many things, developing a solid routine for using proofreading strategies and techniques, it's something that needs to be learned and then practiced until it becomes an everyday way of life. Not only can you help boost the image and reputation of your organization, but you have a wonderful opportunity to add value to your own professional credibility and reputation by becoming known as a consistent, accurate, and reliable proofreader, which is a fabulous tool to add to your own toolbox. This is a great step to take toward building your own personal brand as an administrative professional. And so with this last slide, I encourage you to start your new focus on proofreading techniques today and to make those routines a daily habit. You'll be so glad that you did. Why? Well, funny you should ask. Because your work will stand out. Because you, the administrative professional, will stand out in the crowd. And because your organization will be viewed that much more favorably by its stakeholders. So thank you all for joining this conversation today. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, Anne. If anybody does have any questions, you can either, again, do the Q&A box, or you can unmute your line using #6. And just so everyone is aware, in the follow-up email, I will include Anne's contact information as well as a copy of the presentation as a handout. So you will be receiving that. And I guess we'll wait a minute or two for some questions.
So I really value this opportunity to have sat down and given some really specific thought about the kinds of things that I find helpful in my work on proofreading. You know, it might seem a little overwhelming to think, oh, do you really expect me to do all of those 50 things every time I look at a document? And in fact, to be honest, once you get in the habit of checking for all these things and just being aware of all these things, it will just become a way of life, and it will be no big deal. It's just like our morning routines at home. You know, we get up, we do what we got to do, we hardly even think about it. But we're always glad when we're ready to roll at work and well-groomed and poised and ready to go. So the same thing applies to our approach to our work.
Okay, it doesn't look like we have any questions.
I have a question.
Oh, okay, perfect.
What do you do when, like, say you're responding to an email and it's an email to the top executive of an organization, and you thoughtlessly say, call him Dick, or, you know, by his first name, or you could be referring to him as Mr. or whatever more appropriate title. How do you correct errors like that? Do you have any suggestions for, like, how do you gracefully apologize, or do you have any suggestions for that sort of situation?
Sometimes I think the best response is to actually pick up the phone. In fact, I made an error the other day that I was quite mortified about, and I'm sure it was more mortifying on my end than it was on the recipient's end, but I immediately knew that it was a personal conversation I had to have. It was a miscommunication about a date that had some trickle-down effect. And so email is not always the answer. Obviously, you'd want to acknowledge the error or the miscommunication, you know, acknowledge the error and set about fixing it, whether it's just a personal contact on the phone or, you know, if you're in the same building, it might be, you know, just go down and have a quick in-person chat. I'm not sure if that's what you were getting at.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, no, that's a great suggestion.
Yeah, because email threads, you know, when they're 20 threads long, they really start to lose the little bit of personal touch that they never had in the first place. And we're so good at doing the whole email bit. You know, I'm guilty of it too. It's just easy sometimes to just fire off an email. And in our quest to be efficient and manage our time and, you know, organizational priorities and all of that, we do that at the risk of not pausing to develop those personal one-on-one relationships and to continue to build that rapport. So, you know, it's a balancing act for sure.
I have one more question.
Absolutely.
How do you manage the beasts of punctuation, like there, your? It's you know, like what? Do you have any suggestions for tricks, memory tricks, or anything, so that we don't mess up on those dumb apostrophes all the time, or like really?
Well, one of the things that
errors.
Pardon me?
Go ahead.
One of the things that I find helpful when I'm trying to really imprint a new learning or help myself to remember something is I will actually put, you know, those 3x3 yellow Post-it notes right on my computer. So I have an easy way right then and there as a little test. Okay, here's the test. Does this make sense in this sentence? Or, you know, when I'm trying to teach myself a new keyboard shortcut, I'll post that shortcut right there so I look at it nonstop for a week and hopefully it filters into my head. But that's one of those things that if you know that that is an area of weakness for you personally, you know, go online, find the exact succinct description that helps you to clarify when you would use and when you wouldn't use those various words, and get them on a sheet. Put them under your keyboard and put them in plastic. You know, pull it out every time you're second guessing yourself about whether you've used the correct one. You know, put the test there. In fact, I can access a resource. I came across a resource recently where they had a very good summary of how you would know when to use these words. So I can actually make sure that comes out available with the hard space and the hard hyphen feature as well.
Very cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, and then I have a question that came in. Do you have any recommended proofreading quizzes?
I don't have any off the top of my head, but again, I can access some on the internet and send those out with the blast, the e-blast, which I will spell check and make sure I don't have errors in. You know, and I have to say, this isn't to say that I personally don't make mistakes. I'm human. I make mistakes like everybody else, but it's cultivating a whole awareness of the importance of at least trying to check for them and trying to catch them. If you've done all of those steps and you've given it yeoman's effort to try to, you know, give it 100% focus on the proofreading phase, just like you did on the creation phase, at the end of the day, if an error still squeaks through, well, I guess that's life. You know, we're all human, but it's certainly if we can say to ourselves that I really gave it as much focus as I could, based on all these kind of things that I've been hearing and all these techniques and strategies, it will really help you to feel confident in your approach to your work. And I can't tell you about, in fact, I ended up as an accidental proofreader. I did not start out to be, you know, the organizational proofreading last look. It just fell to me because I did it so much and because I started to create some routines and I built, fortunately, a good rapport with that process, and so people now look to me for advice on that topic, just like I would look to you for advice on topics that, you know, you're quite comfortable and fluent with.
Okay.
Are there any other questions?
Thank you. All right.
Oh,
well,
this
thank
has
you.
been a real pleasure, everyone. Thank you very much for your focus and your time.
All right, everyone. And again, I'll be sending that follow-up email shortly. Have a great day.
Okay. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.